What Washington hails as a victory, voices from Russia are warning it could become a historic disaster. A senior Russian lawmaker says the U.S. military operation in Venezuela and the capture of President Nicolás Maduro risks ending the same way as past American interventions. Russian Senator Alexey Pushkov warned that what he called a temporary U.S. triumph could ultimately turn into a disaster for President Donald Trump. Pushkov said Trump's actions and rhetoric may appear effective in the short term, but history tells a very different story. He pointed to past U.S. interventions in Iraq, Afghanistan, and Libya, where early declarations of victory eventually gave way to long wars, instability, and, in some cases, outright defeat. According to Pushkov, by attacking Venezuela and seizing its president, the United States violated all international norms. He said Washington had once again stirred global tensions, pushing the world back toward what he described as the savage imperialism of the 19th century. Pushkov also accused the U.S. of reviving a Wild West mentality, while claiming the right to act freely in the Western Hemisphere without regard for international law. The remarks come as tensions remain high in Caracas. On January 3, Venezuela's Foreign Minister Iván Gil Pinto said U.S. forces attacked both civilian and military targets in the capital. He described Washington's actions as military aggression and confirmed that a nationwide state of emergency has been declared. President Donald Trump has confirmed that the United States carried out large-scale strikes on Venezuela. Trump said Nicolás Maduro and his wife were captured during the operation and taken out of the country. As Washington defends its actions and Moscow sounds the alarm, the question now is whether the U.S. operation in Venezuela will be remembered as a swift victory or the beginning of another long and costly chapter.
There is and can be no legitimate justification for the egregious crime deliberately and cynically committed by the United States in the city of Caracas. Nicolás Maduro and his wife in the United States, and as of today, as we know, in New York, we propose and call on the American leadership to immediately release the legitimately elected president of the independent state and his wife. Mr. Chairman, first of all, we would like to congratulate you on assuming the duties of Chairman of the Council, and secondly, to welcome the newly elected members of the Council. The beginning of the new year has shocked all those in the world who had hoped that respect for international law, non-interference in the internal affairs of other states, and reliance on diplomacy would prevail, and that the search for compromises would become the key principles guiding the work of the new American administration. The assault on the leader of Venezuela, which resulted in the deaths of several dozen Venezuelan and Cuban citizens, has, in the eyes of many, become a harbinger of a return to an era of lawlessness, forceful American dominance, chaos, and lawlessness, from which dozens of countries in various regions continue to suffer. There is and can be no legitimate justification for the egregious crime deliberately and cynically committed by the United States in the city of Caracas. We strongly condemn the act of armed aggression by the United States against Venezuela, which violates all international legal norms. In connection with confirmed information about the presence of the abducted president of Venezuela, Nicolás Maduro, and his wife in the United States, and as of today, as we know, in New York, we propose and call on the American leadership to immediately release the legitimately elected president of the independent state and his wife. Any existing problems and disagreements between the United States and Venezuela must be resolved through dialogue. This is precisely what the UN Charter prescribes for us. the goals and principles of which a number of states in recent years have begun to apply selectively, depending on the political situation. Today we are reaping the consequences of their irresponsibility and selectivity in matters of observing the norms of international law, which they equated with a world order that we equate with the so-called rules-based world order. Here is your world order in all its glory, which horrifies even the most committed Atlanticists. Mr. Chairman, we express our firm solidarity with the people of Venezuela in the face of external aggression. We fully support the course of the Bolivarian government aimed at protecting national interests and the sovereignty of the country. The aggressive actions of Washington have already been condemned by many states and multilateral organizations, including the Non-Aligned Movement, the African Union, and the Group of Friends in Defense of the UN Charter. We hope that this international lawlessness will promptly receive an objective and comprehensive assessment in terms of international law using universal UN mechanisms and other multilateral formats. This process should not be influenced by the recognition or non-recognition of the legitimacy of any given state or association. Nicolás Maduro. Therefore, the vague muttering of an attempt to avoid fundamental assessments on the part of those who, in other situations, foamed at the mouth demanding that others comply with the UN Charter, today appears especially hypocritical and unintelligent. I hope you will realize this and stop using double standards and trying to justify this, a blatant act of aggression out of fear of angering the would-be resurrected American global policeman. What is especially striking is the unprecedented cynicism with which Washington did not even try to disguise the true goals of its criminal operation. Establishing unlimited control over Venezuela's natural resources and asserting its hegemonic ambitions in Latin America. In this way, Washington is giving new momentum to neocolonialism and imperialism, which have been repeatedly and resolutely rejected by the peoples of this region and by the global South as a whole. Dear colleagues, the current situation makes the unity of the entire international community extremely important. In the firm rejection demonstrated in the case of Washington of the methods and tools of American military and foreign policy. Only in this way can we force Washington to reconsider or even abandon its dangerous delusions. As we said at the previous meeting on Venezuela, the bell now ringing loudly throughout the region tolls for every country of the Western Hemisphere. It tolls for all UN member states and for the future of the world organization itself. To ignore it today means to show cowardice and lack of principle, essentially blessing the further erosion of international law and even basic civilized conduct between states. We must not allow the United States to arrogate to itself the role of some supreme judge, the only one with the right to invade any country, determine who is guilty, and assign punishment, and carry out these actions, disregarding the concepts of international jurisdiction, sovereignty, and non-interference. Is this really the kind of world we aspired to as we approach the 80th anniversary of the adoption of the UN Charter, when we all signed the corresponding statement by the President of the Security Council? Is this what the UN reform, which we all support, is aimed at? Or do the UN and the Security Council no longer exist today? And does everyone now have to go to Washington for permission to rule, and for every nation's right to self-determination and to choose its own destiny? Does that mean nothing? These are the questions that are important for all of us to answer today. And if that answer is honest and principled, then perhaps even the American leadership will openly, which declares its intention to govern another country in the interest of the United States, will look into its own constitution, which begins with the words, "We the people of the United States," and will actually start to recognize the sovereignty of other states instead of engaging in regime change against those it finds inconvenient.
This past weekend, colleagues, the United States successfully carried out a surgical law enforcement operation facilitated by the U.S. military against two indicted fugitives of American justice, narco-terrorist Nicolás Maduro and Celia Flores. Colleagues, Nicolás Maduro is responsible for attacks on the people of the United States, for destabilizing the Western Hemisphere, and illegitimately repressing the people of Venezuela. As Secretary Rubio has said, there is no war against Venezuela or its people. We are not occupying a country. This was a law enforcement operation. Western Hemisphere, the illegal drugs, predominantly cocaine, entering the United States and increasing. Colleagues, Maduro is not just an indicted drug trafficker. He was an illegitimate so-called president. He was not a head of state. For years, Maduro and his cronies have manipulated Venezuela's electoral system to maintain their illegitimate grip on power. In fact, just 2 years ago, in 2024, a UN panel of experts report found that the election in that year was absolutely and completely a farce and fell well short of the most basic transparency and integrity measures essential to upholding credible elections. If the UN and the United Nations in this body confers legitimacy on an illegitimate narco-terrorist and the same treatment in this charter of a democratically elected president or head of state, what kind of organization is this? In fact, in its own 2025 World Drug Report, members of this council, colleagues, the United States wants a better future for Venezuela. We believe a better future for the people of Venezuela and for the people of the region and the world is stabilizing the region and making the neighborhood that we live in a much better and safer place. And this is why millions of Venezuelans that have fled this brutal regime are celebrating and cheering around the world as this body pontificates, including those celebrating are including in my home state of Florida, where hundreds of thousands of Venezuelans have fled this regime's brutality. I want to reiterate, President Trump gave diplomacy a chance. He offered Maduro multiple off-ramps. He tried to de-escalate. Maduro refused to take them. President Trump made it clear that the narco-terrorism must stop, and yet it continued. The United States will not waver in our actions to protect Americans from the scourge of narco-terrorism and seeks peace, liberty, and justice for the great people of Venezuela. I thank you, Mr. President.